everyone. Are you ready for another installment of Spooky Tales From Afar? I still have so much fun with that. I have no idea why. But anyway, here we go. Another installment of my series that I'm doing for the month of Halloween, Spooky Tales From Afar. But this is, in fact, the All-Around Adventure Podcast. In case you're joining me for the first time, this is the show where you hear amazing tales from afar and get the all-important life lessons that go along with them. Those are stories from myself, as well as the fantastic guests that I welcome on this podcast. However, I also have a solo cast that I do called Travel Reflections, where I talk about some of my own travel experiences and share them with you all. And for this month of October, I'm talking about some of the scariest travel experiences that I've had. You know, I have so much fun talking about these, especially right now during this time of year. So, and if you haven't listened to the first episode that I did in this series, talking about a scary story that I had in my home state of Michigan, do go and check that out. That's the one that I titled Monster in the Moonlight. And now this one that I have for you all today is titled Lurking in the Darkness. And we are heading across the pond for this story, and we are going to Edinburgh, Scotland. Now, Edinburgh, Scotland was one of the last cities that I visited while I was living in the UK. I lived in the city of York for an entire year when I was going to grad school to become an archaeologist. And, I got to travel a little bit around the UK, but the last city that I visited before I departed for now, I guess, and I'm sure I'll find my way back to the UK, but the last city that I went to was Edinburgh. I was there with a friend of mine who was visiting me to help celebrate my completing my master's degree program. And he and we decided that we were going to take part in a ghost tour that was being offered there in Edinburgh. And I always like doing ghost tours when I travel to cities, and I've done them all over the world. If we would go back to the UK, in York, there were several different tour operators that were doing ghost tours. In London, I did a Jack the Ripper tour and a regular ghost tour there. Those were a lot of fun. And even here in the U.S. in historic places around Washington, D.C. and the Carolinas, I've done some spooky ghost tours there as well as a vampire tour when I was in New Orleans. And, they're just a lot of fun. I get to learn a little bit of the history of the cities that I'm visiting, as well as kind of get a spooky twist to it to really go along with my interests. I've always liked spooky stuff as I was growing up. But today I'm going to talk about one specific ghost tour that I took a part of. And like I said, this was in Edinburgh, Scotland. And this was actually one of the scariest ghost tours that I've ever been a part of, and certainly one of my favorites, and one that I certainly remember quite well. And some of the stories that my guide told me and the rest of the tour group during our tour they were just literally spine tingling and chilling. And one story in particular really stood out to me, and that's the story that I'm going to share with you all today. So I hope you like it, and I hope you're listening to this with the lights on, because it's going to get pretty scary. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right on into it. Ooh. All right, so the tour that I took part in was part of a tour that was offered by the City of the Dead tour operators, and where they were taking us to a couple of different places in Edinburgh. But the first one was the Edinburgh Vaults, which was kind of like a tunnel network that ran underneath the city. And way back when, and my dates are going to be a little bit faulty, as well as some other details here as far as like names and things along those lines too. I mean, some of that context isn't quite fully important to enjoy the story, but I'll do the best I can. But way back when, it was actually illegal to be homeless in the city in Edinburgh. And if you were caught sleeping outside in the middle of the night, you were technically breaking the law. So there were these vaults, this underground tunnel network in the city that a lot of people would flock to, and it would be really crowded in there, and everything from just individuals and families would just try to find whatever space that they could amongst like the masses of people that were piled in there just trying to sleep. And oftentimes these tunnels would attract some pretty shady characters, everything from thieves murderers, and you could even hear like sounds of people doing like satanic human sacrifices elsewhere in the tunnel, and you'd hear screams, and the family, especially families with children, would hear them and, you know, be terrified, but just be glad about the fact that it was happening somewhere else in the tunnel and not right where they were sleeping. So a lot of darkness effectively occurred in these tunnels, and just hearing some of those stories was just very, very chilling. And it kind of creates a bit of a heavy feeling just walking through an area like that, and just, you know, hearing about what had happened there. And it's like you just feel the weight of just how dark of a place and how much darkness and, well, quite frankly, evil this place has seen throughout the years. And I felt this in similar places that I had been to as well. A couple of places that come to mind were Andersonville, the Civil War POW camp there, and I won't talk about that too deeply, but that was another place that saw just so much anguish and suffering and despair and death that I really just felt heavy walking through the grounds there. And so, and this tunnel was also no exception. It's just, again, hearing these stories and just how terrifying they were and how awful the types of things that happened in there, it just felt really, really heavy. However, the scariest story that I remembered hearing on this tour was actually not really quite something that happened with my tour guide, but a colleague of hers, another tour leader, and something that happened while he was leading one of his own tours. And yeah, and this story was just tingling for my spine and just really scared me. And here's how it went. And this was something that happened while this man was leading his tour that actually led him to quit his job because it frightened him that much. So he was leading a group through these tunnels, guiding them by the light of his flashlight. And as they were coming deeper and deeper into the tunnels, he had stopped for a minute to tell a story. The group gathered around him to hear what he had to say. And just a little bit into his story, talking a little bit more about the history of the tunnels, his flashlight went out. And then a lot of people were scared and a little bit worried because his flashlight just went out. He didn't do it. They thought maybe he was doing it as a joke, but he didn't do it on purpose. His flashlight just burnt out on its own. But I guess giving it a few shakes, his flashlight eventually came back on. And he tried to reassure the group that it wasn't him that did it. It wasn't part of the tour. It wasn't a joke or anything like that. Something just happened with his flashlight in that moment. So even though the rest of the group seemed to calm down from that, one woman in the group started freaking out because she had a young daughter about the age of 7 that was with her, and she was missing from the group. And then once she announced that her daughter was missing, everyone was like looking around trying to find this girl, seeing where she might have went to. And they saw her towards the back of one of the tunnels, standing right up against a wall. And the woman rushed over there to get her daughter, and was kind of scolding her, saying, what are you doing? Why did you walk away from the group just now when the lights went out? And the little girl responded, oh, I didn't walk away from the group. A hand grabbed my wrist and pulled me away. And then the woman looked at her daughter confused, and she said, but I didn't grab your wrist and take you anywhere, sweetie. And the little girl responded with, I know it wasn't you, Mommy. You don't have claws. Now, doesn't that just send a chill down your spine? It certainly did with me when I heard that part of the story. And it's just thinking to myself, okay, so what was that? Was that a demon that grabbed that little girl's wrist and tried to pull her away from the group? And if so, where was he trying to lead her? And what would have happened if the tour operator, if his flashlight wasn't able to turn back on, and then everyone remained shrouded in the darkness? Needless to say, what had happened there, and hearing what that little girl said, scared this tour operator beyond belief. He was able to finish the tour, but he didn't show up for work the next day. What had happened and what happened with that little girl scared him that much. And quite frankly, I can't say that I blame him because that would just be absolutely terrifying. And, I hear certain things about, like, when people engage in activities like, devil worship and things like that, kind of what they were talking about, what my tour guide talked about as she was taking us through. I hear stories about, portals and gateways and all kinds of sort of stuff. And I'm not sure how much I truly believe that. I just hear it in the realms of things like pop culture and sometimes on like, TV programs and stuff like that. But, it just kind of makes, sometimes I just can't help but think, what if something like that, actually happened down there at some point in time? Either way, that was definitely a very terrifying story. And I think I was kind of looking forward to, at that point, finishing up that part of the tour and leaving the vaults to move on to the second part of the tour, which was the cemetery. And maybe I might share some of the stories that I heard from the cemetery, which were also very chilling. Not quite as chilling as the story that I just told you all, but I'm sure maybe I'll touch back on that later on. But for now, I think I'll leave the scares at that for today. I hope you all enjoyed this episode of the All Around Adventure podcast. If you like what you heard today, make sure you are subscribed to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. It's a weekly podcast. I got a brand new episode coming at you every single Monday. And also leave us a rating and review either on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you might be listening to this show. That'll help get us trending higher so that way more people can find this podcast and enjoy it as well. Also, we have a free Facebook group, private Facebook group that is, called Travel Titans. It's a group that was created for travelers to share their stories, their tips and advice, as well as their inspiration pertaining to both travel and self-development. And we certainly welcome you to join us. And if you think you'd like to be a part of that, head over to facebook.com/groups/Travel Titans. The last thing that I want to share before I close out here, I just want to thank you for tuning in today and listening to this new installment of Spooky Travel Tales from Afar. I greatly appreciate your support, and I certainly don't take it for granted. And that's all I have to say for now. I hope you all continue to enjoy this month of Halloween. I know I certainly am, and I'll be back next Monday with a brand new episode that features another fantastic guest, so be sure to check back in. But until then, I'm Josh Guerrero saying be safe, happy travels, and always move forward.